Hi everyone, welcome. What you see right here is it's a tray of castings basically, but besides the castings that the worms left behind are also what I assume to be a whole bunch of cocoons within the material. So what I've been doing lately when I finish up a system, and in this case this system was ended 19 days ago and all the worms got relocated. This system was placed over here on top of these pieces of wood, and underneath the wood are some Christmas lights burning. So I'm trying to generate a little bit of gentle heat to keep these trays nice and warm so that the hatching of the cocoons might happen. You can see I've got that same setup going for a couple different systems. So 17 days since we put it onto this warming rack here, when I was able to make a little bit of room for it. But it's not the cocoon nursery we're checking in on. It's actually the trays, or the boxes at this point, or buckets, that the worms were relocated into. So while all the worms lived in a single tray up until 19 days ago, it was at that point that we decided to try to separate the population into 3 separate containers and see if we can grow their population a little bit by providing them with plenty of bedding to live in and stuff like that, you know. So that was the whole idea behind breaking up that tray of worms into 3 separate containers. But it's been 10 days since we last checked in on them. I believe that they're ready for a little bit of food, so I came down here with some food that was kind of portioned in a way that would be fair for 3 separate systems. I've got 3 separate days worth of coffee, and even this one right here on the very end over here, it's still steaming hot. It's nice and warm when I hold it from below like this. So it might be helping to thaw out some of these banana peels and cantaloupe rinds that they're going to get too. I mean, if they all lived in a single tray right now, I tried to think to myself, hey, would this be maybe a little bit too much for a single tray? But, you know, it doesn't matter to me. I think I'm going to combine it with a generous amount of bedding, and then maybe we don't have to check in on these guys for a couple weeks. But we're going to get these boxes up onto the bench one at a time, give them their fair share of food today, and then we'll be good to go. We're starting in bucket number 1. And if you were with me the last time we checked in on these bins 10 days ago, or these buckets 10 days ago, you might remember that I was struggling a little bit with the positioning of the camera, because I was using this clip mount to attach the camera to the edge of the bucket, and it kind of hung right out in the middle, right above where I needed to reach in and gain access to the material below. So I've opted this time to place the camera up on its tripod and just kind of sneak in from the edge and peek down into the container from around the rim. This will give me a whole lot more space to work, and it'll save us some of the obscured light. It was making a little bit of a shadow and darkening our view. So I'm going to also try to keep my head out of the light's way to make sure that the light from above can make it down into the bin. And it's a little bit awkward, you know, it's a very small space, much smaller than I'm used to working in. And it's a little bit awkward needing to reach down from up high down into the system to gain access, but it's not that bad. When we first came in here last time, 10 days ago, it was its first feeding, yeah. So yeah, sometimes I'll build new bins with food tucked away, which I count as feeding number 1 in those cases, but this was not one of those cases. Here we just had a box of bedding into which we placed the worms, and they received no food for 9 days. Those first 9 days of living in here, they had to get by with whatever leftovers accompanied them into the bin, which was part of the baiting station that I had created in their old environment to round them up. So they got to work on their leftovers for those first 9 days, and then at that time, we didn't really see any sort of concentration of worms in any one given spot. The worms were just kind of exploring the whole container. There was no concentration of food in any one location. On this occasion, we had placed the food in the middle, and I've spotted worms here and there, but just in an effort to try to unobstruct the view of them by pushing some of the surrounding materials aside, I feel like I'm either getting my arm in the way or just causing an avalanche to collapse the material down and further obstruct our view. So we might not get really stellar worm spottings in these systems, but hopefully we'll be able to gauge how things are doing by once in a while stumbling across a smaller concentration of worms here and there, but at this point I've more or less tilled the whole system up. Blending in some of the drier bedding that was out on the surface into the system, but considering that there's no plastic covering this system, things are quite nice from a moisture perspective. I was prepared to possibly enhance the system's moisture retention abilities by adding additional coverings, because you saw there was first there was a sheet of newspaper right on top of the bedding, and then on top of that was a piece of cardboard, but those two pieces of material seem to be doing a pretty good job holding the moisture in, so I'm going to continue to trust that they'll do the same going forward. So we'll just stick with those when we're done and cover up only with those. Just here and there I get like a little chunk of matted up newspaper. Usually I'm able to, let's see if I can get this recentered. Yeah, I'm just still getting the hang of doing this with this setup here, so forgive me if I don't pay attention to what the viewfinder is showing me off on the side here. Yeah, sometimes I find little jumbled up pieces of newspaper, but I've kind of remedied that more recently. So you can see the majority of my bedding flakes apart pretty nicely because I've incorporated the use of tiny particles of leaves everywhere when I fix up a batch of new bedding. So the little particles seem to get in between the pieces of paper, preventing that matting of the material to itself. So I've kind of gone a little different route now, since we're adding frozen foods, and also because of the limited space in this system. I've decided I'm going to start feeding these systems on one side, then I'll flip to the other side, alternating from side to side, because in a very small system like this, should the materials that I place down into the system start into that breakdown process, that bacterial breakdown process, and if it should start actually kind of composting on its own and heating up, I guess is the term they use, it could actually generate a fair bit of heat that would really bother the worms. Although down here in the winter in my chilly basement, it might not be that bad. So maybe it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I just don't like the idea of having that reaction, if it should occur, happen right in the middle, and then limiting them with places that they can go to avoid it and get away from it. So I thought it might make good sense, just in the, just in case that were to occur in here, then we can feel a little bit rest assured that we've provided the worms with a little bit of space to retreat away from the excess heat. So I've laid in some of my pre-made bedding. Now we're just going to give them a fair portion of the fruits that I bought down here for them. And then we've also got a little bit of grit, which in my case is pulverized eggshell. And we've also got coffee to give these little guys. So let's start getting this stuff in here. I'm going to combine the coffee that they're getting here with the food below, but I'm also going to drop in a little bit more bedding. You can see I'm being really generous with the bedding because it is my aim in these systems to kind of get the system pretty full and pretty big in terms of area or volume. I keep mixing my two-dimensional and three-dimensional expressions. So I guess when you're talking about area, you're talking about, like an acre, right? But if you're talking about volume, you're talking about a cubic foot or something like that. So here we're talking about volume, and I want to make sure that they've got plenty of room to move around and be comfortable in. And as far as comfort is concerned and moisture is concerned, I always feel like I'm a little bit, I don't know, bad, a little bit bad. I don't know, I'm just not that good, I think, at judging the moisture level of the materials in my worm bins. So I think that the worms will typically prefer a little bit more moisture than what I think is adequate for them. So I think we will dump in a little bit of moisture, but this doesn't really make me feel like I need to react to the moisture situation. So I'm not going to try to enhance the coverings or anything like that. I think they'll be just fine with that newspaper and cardboard coverings to protect the system from losing all of its moisture to evaporation. I did actually see on my thermostat the other day that it has a little button I can press to see what my relative humidity within the house is, and it showed 21%, which I've heard other people mentioning their humidity levels at home. So I figured I'd give it a try, and to me it seemed a little bit low, and I can feel it, you know. I'm putting hand moisturizer on all the time, stuff like that, trying to combat the dryness. And I'm also observing, you know, dryness in my systems on occasion. So I'm so glad that I've got this spray nozzle with this pump. I could load this thing up with a couple gallons of water, give it some pressure. I could just keep spraying and spraying with it all day long. Alright, I didn't want to make this into an excessively long video, but I think we've covered most of the basics that pertain to all three systems in terms of what my strategies are, what my game plan is, and all that other fun stuff. So I think we might be able to pick up the pace here a little bit and get the other two fed without so much chit-chat. What do you think? I'm sure you're probably all for that. And even though I didn't think we'd end up using a feeding zone indicator in a system so small, with the original assumption that we'd just be feeding down the middle each time, now that we've switched over to feeding on one side or the other at this point and making the plan to alternate on each occasion, I think it makes good sense to use our coffee filter the same way as we always do, which is to indicate where we last fed. So that works out pretty good. So that's bin number one, or bucket number one. And it did seem to me like they were pretty much in need of food. I don't know. What do you think? I saw some scraps, a little bit of leftovers here and there, but not much, that's for sure. So I'm going to go get the other system out here and we'll continue. Alright, this is bucket number two, and what we're seeing in here is something we see in some of my systems on occasion. At first I was perplexed at what are these little tiny stains and little bits of debris. And since we're on a lower level underneath a shelf of my shelving system, what we've got is a little spider, probably with its web right above our bin, waiting for some sort of opportunistic flying insects to come by, because they zeroed in on our little supply of food here. And I guess this, you know, strategy of the spider is to try to grab those little flying insects, and I think all those little scraps of leftover insect husks that we saw, and that's what those are, by the way, are evidence that this spider is doing well. And maybe it's also evidence of the fact that maybe I've got too many flying insects in my wormery and I should do something about it. Alright, so I'm trying to excavate a little bit more carefully to see if we can get a glimpse of how our worms are doing and how the food supply is holding up. So I'm now able to actually see some worms within some of the food that they're eating, and I don't remember what it was that they got last time, but it does look like there might be some leftovers of it. I can't tell what it is, and the funny thing about stuff you put into a worm bin, you know, if this thing was sitting out on your kitchen counter for a week and you wouldn't be able to recognize it, you might be able to definitely tell that it's got some sort of particular characteristic from its odor. But the funny thing about stuff in your worm bin is that you don't smell a single thing, not a thing. So that thing that was in my hand, I could have just put that right under my nose and taken a big huge whiff, and I would still not be able to tell what it was, because it basically has zero odor, which to me I think was one of the biggest surprises I had when I started into this whole game. You know, you kind of initially go into the whole thing thinking, oh great, I'm going to be storing decomposing vegetable matter. So I'm going to have all kinds of stinky stuff in my house. No, not at all. I mean, yeah, sometimes you do get odors, but those odors are typically kind of an early warning sign that something's going into a state of imbalance somehow. Some sort of, you know, non-productive bacteria or something that might have caught a foothold down in your system for one reason or another. A lot of times it's just excess moisture or a glut of food, or just a situation where the worms are not able to keep up with the supply and the stuff just actually does start to break down and rot within the bin. Luckily that doesn't happen very often. Luckily the good bacteria that inhabit most worm bins seem to keep all that under control, or at least that's my assumption. I'm not an expert on why that is, but I assume it has something to do with the bacteria that's breaking it down in such a way that it doesn't create foul odors. And then if it just does happen to maybe start into a form of decomposition that's perhaps, for example, anaerobic, where it's a type of bacteria that thrives in the absence of oxygen, then you do get some really foul odors, and then you know right away you got to aerate or do something about it, let it dry, stuff like that. So I was just using this opportunity to chit-chat and try to stir in a little bit of the drier bedding I found out on the surface down into the damper stuff down below. But here too, it really feels like the moisture level down low is really good. It seemed like we found a few chunks of leftover mush, whatever it was. But usually when I find leftovers, it's not enough to deter me from giving them the next portion. So they're definitely getting fed, all three of the buckets, regardless of what I find. Because I like to stack the next feeding on top of the existing feeding. Because then once they're done with the current batch of food, they've got the reserves right there, already partially broken down and ready to be accessed. There's the stem of a banana. The decomposition of that tells me that must have come over with the worms. That must have been part of the baiting station in the old container used to lure them out of the finished castings, and probably came over with them. Because it's highly unlikely that this would have been placed in here 10 days ago, based on its decomposition. All right, we're already getting a little bit of an avalanche occurring, so let's get the food in here. Oops, okay, making a mess here. So we've put in some of our pre-made bedding. Let's see if we can give them a equal quantity of melon bits and banana bits. I've even got this old coffee filter. It's actually one of the round ones, one of the old round ones that I used to put aside from the old coffee maker. More recently I've been using the cone ones, and I flatten out the cone coffee maker filters. But I still have a pretty good sized stack of the old round coffee filters. And this one was just sitting around here, got used for this, that, and the other thing recently, so I figured it too could just be utilized as bedding. And let's start mixing in some of this coffee here. So like we did before, we're going to mix in some of this coffee with some of the underlying foods and bedding that we added. But we're also going to supplement the bedding with just a little bit more from my collection of pre-made bedding, and then throw the remainder of the coffee on top of that. To me, it just seems like the coffee stands a better chance of, you know what, I think you know my story because I've been repetitively saying the same story over and over. One of my viewers pointed it out to me yesterday, so I think I'll just keep my mouth shut on that topic from now on. I think most people understand my coffee strategy. Okay, not much more to do here, right? We've gotten the feeding in, we gave them a good bit of bedding. Just trying to remember, did we include the grit? No. Let's toss them in there. I guess there's no harm if we did and we just forgot. My brain is like a sieve these days. I can't remember what I did 2 minutes ago. Very good, very good. All right, we're almost done. We just got one more bucket to feed, and I guess the advantage of having multiple systems running like this that are pretty much identical in every possible way I can think of, the opportunity presents itself to just compare, you know, hey, since we've seen XYZ in the first two buckets, we should expect pretty much the same in the third, but if for whatever reason we start observing a significant deviation, then that might be a clue too to something that's, you know, possibly going bad, but it also could be just a telltale of something you did right that you should replicate in your other systems too, right? So we've got one more bucket to feed. Let's get that out here too. Oops. Okay. This ain't so bad. I'm kind of getting the hang of it. It's still a little bit awkward needing to reach down into a tray and kind of peek over the rim to see what I'm doing, and it is a little bit cramped for space, but it's not the end of the world. So here again, just comparing, we've got dry stuff on top, which is kind of expected in a way, but we don't have to go too far to get to some nice stuff. Here too, I expect we're going to see some leftovers, but they're probably all going to look very similar to what we experienced in the other bins. Is just kind of a mushy, whatever it is, not giving off any odor, so makes it a little bit tricky to identify what it was that I fed last time. But like I said, it's not too important, and there's obviously not a whole lot of it remaining in here. So I'm just kind of blending it in. It's where the most moisture is, right where that food had been placed last. So we'll try to blend some of that nice dampened bedding with some of the drier stuff that was sitting out on top. Now there's something down here, I could feel it. Here again, this would be something that would have come along with the worms from their previous accommodations. This is the seed of a mango. Well, it's probably just the husk of the seed. What just slid out might be what remains of the actual seed that's usually held within the husk until the worms eat it. Not a lot of action happening down in here, but eventually it'll go. Perhaps whatever yummy feeding I gave them last time was enough to steer their attention away from that old mango seed. But they'll get back to it and they'll break it down in time. Very nice. You know, for only 19 days of age, it does seem like we're getting a pretty good collection of castings developing down here within this material. I mean, you can see everywhere we look, there's concentrations of good amounts of it piling up in certain spots. Usually where the food was, where they've been hanging out and kind of taking care of their business while they're simultaneously eating. It's funny how animals don't seem to mind doing that. Alright, that was a portion of a avocado pit. I've been known to take my avocado pits and try to slice them into little pieces to help speed up the breakdown process, or at least that's what I thought happens. But I found that even a whole avocado seed, even though it's like, you know, almost like the size of a billiard ball, can pretty much go into a worm bin, and then in a fairly short period of time it'll get infiltrated by microorganisms and kind of change its consistency to the point where it pretty readily just breaks into little tiny bits. So cutting it up the way I've been doing isn't really necessary. You just need to give it a little bit extra time, and then it'll get to that point on its own quite nicely. So what do we got left here? We're giving them everything that remains of the cantaloupe and the banana peels. And I'll just shake out the bag in case there's any small fragments remaining. I think we've given each system an equal quantity of food, although as far as the count of worms in each system, I couldn't tell you for sure if we've got an exact count of worms in each bucket. I just went with a really rough estimate, assuming that I was starting with 1,200 worms. I assumed that I equally split it 3 ways, and that 1/3 of that estimated 1,200 lives in here, so it's 400 worms that I'm assuming that we're feeding here. So it's not a huge amount of worms that need to be fed. And my estimate could be way off too, so who knows. But I think we're portioning pretty good. Whatever amount that I gave to them last time seemed to, for the most part, get worked away, with the exception of a couple small bits of leftover, but it seemed like there wasn't a whole lot remaining, so it seems to me like they're doing quite nicely. Now, I can't remember, did we? I don't know why, I just always forget. Couldn't remember if we put in grit, but I'm putting some in now just to play it safe, and then we're more or less done. At this point, we're just covering things back up and trying to agitate some of the drier bedding down into the system. Did I forget to add water to the second one? Gosh. I'm such a... I gotta, like... I don't know. I need, like, a director or something, whatever. Who's the person that keeps an eye on what you're doing to make sure you didn't miss your lines when you're an actor? Maybe an understudy. Somebody that knows what I should be doing and steering me straight, but whatever. If we omitted the addition of moisture to the second bucket, then shame on me, but I'm not going to treat it as a big omission or problem. Maybe we'll just notice it next time we come in that maybe it is a tad drier than the other systems, but my guess is that we're probably not even going to notice. So I think we're in good shape here. I really like how these systems are coming along in terms of the volume that I've managed to build it up to. I'm not quite there yet, but I am approaching kind of like the halfway point on these buckets. And I do intend to be really generous on the application of bedding on each occasion, because I do want to make them really comfortable with the sense that they've got a lot of room to move around in and plenty of room in which to expand their population into as well. So that's kind of my aim by creating these 3 separate buckets with the population that used to live in a single bucket. So we'll see if my goals are met at some point in the future. But that's pretty much it for the video, everyone. I'll get this bucket back over where it belongs. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.